The cashier looked at me and said my card had already been used. For 2 drinks and a table for 2. If you like stories like this, subscribe to the channel and tell me where you're listening from. It was 4:17 in the afternoon when I walked into the little cafe downtown, still wearing the same blue blouse I had on from work. I had planned to grab a coffee, check my bank app, and go home before traffic got bad. Nothing dramatic, nothing strange. At least, that was the plan. The woman behind the counter was maybe in her late 50s, with kind eyes and the tired face of someone who had seen too many long days. I handed her my card without even thinking about it. She smiled, swiped it, and then frowned at the screen. Not a big frown, just enough to make me notice. "Let me try that again," she said. I gave her a small laugh, the kind people give when they want to make an awkward moment feel normal. "Sure, maybe the machine's being weird." She swiped it a second time, then a third. Her smile disappeared. She lowered her voice and looked at me like she was trying to be careful. "Ma'am, this card was used today." I blinked. "That's impossible." She turned the monitor a little, as if she didn't want the people in line behind me to hear. "At Bella Napoli, less than an hour ago." I felt my stomach tighten. Bella Napoli was one of those places with candlelight, white tablecloths, and prices that made you read the menu twice. It wasn't somewhere I went alone. It wasn't somewhere I had planned to go at all. I looked down at the card in my hand, then back at her. Maybe it's a mistake. The cashier shook her head slowly. "No, honey. The receipt notes are clear. 2 drinks, a table for 2. For a second, I thought I hadn't heard her right. The words just sat there between us, heavy and stupid and impossible. 2 drinks, a table for 2. My mouth went dry. "Can you say that again?" She did. Softer this time, like she already knew I was about to fall apart. "It was used today, at a restaurant. 2 drinks, 1 table for 2. I stood there frozen, feeling the room around me keep moving while my own body stopped. A man behind me cleared his throat. Somewhere near the pastry case, a child laughed. The normal sounds of a normal place kept going, but I couldn't catch up to any of them. My husband had told me he was at work. That morning, he had kissed my forehead in the kitchen and said he'd be tied up all day with meetings. He'd even complained about having to stay late. I remembered that, because I'd offered to bring him dinner, and he had smiled and said not to bother, that he would probably just eat something quick at the office. Quick. Apparently, quick looked a lot like wine glasses and a table for 2. The cashier handed my card back with both hands, like she was returning something fragile. "I'm sorry," she said. "I thought you should know." I wanted to ask her more questions. I wanted to demand a name, a time, a signature, anything. But my throat felt locked shut. All I could do was take the receipt she printed for me and stare at the numbers as if they might rearrange themselves into something harmless. They didn't. The date was today. The time was 3:06, and the charge was real. I left the cafe without buying anything. My coffee remained untouched on the counter. By the time I got to my car, my hands were shaking so badly, I had to press the key fob twice before the doors unlocked. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, just breathing. In, out, in, out. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe he used the card for someone else. Maybe there was some explanation that made sense if I only waited long enough to hear it. But deep down, I already knew this was not the kind of mistake people made by accident. My phone was still in my purse. I opened it, went straight to the bank app, and pulled up the latest charge. Bella Napoli. A table for 2. Exactly like she said. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Then I called my husband. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding casual, almost cheerful. "Hey, babe." I closed my eyes. "Where are you?" There was a tiny pause. Not enough for most people to notice. Enough for me. "At the office," he said. "Why?" I looked back at the receipt sitting in my lap and felt something cold move through me. Because now I knew that either he was lying, or my whole life was about to split open, and I was no longer interested in pretending that I hadn't heard what the cashier said. I got home and found him in the kitchen, leaning against the counter like nothing in the world was wrong. He looked up when I walked in and gave me that easy smile I had once trusted without thinking. "You're late," he said. I held the receipt in my purse so tightly the paper bent. My face felt stiff, almost numb. But I kept my voice even. I had to stop for a few things. He nodded, like that made perfect sense. You okay? That question almost made me laugh. I wanted to throw the paper at him right there. I wanted to watch his expression change when he saw the name of the restaurant. The time, the charge, the little proof that his lie had already been printed and paid for. But the cashier's voice was still in my head, calm and careful, and something about that made me stop. Not yet. If I exploded now, he would do what people always do when they get caught too early. He would deny, explain, soften, turn the story into something I couldn't pin down. I knew that game. I had seen it in other people's lives. I had spent years watching numbers, records, and documents tell the truth that people tried to hide. So I smiled. Just tired, I said. Long day. He came closer and brushed my arm with his hand. I told you not to push yourself so hard. The way he said it made my skin crawl. He was standing there acting concerned, acting patient, like he was the one taking care of me. Like he had any right to worry about my day when he'd been sitting in a restaurant with someone else. I set my bag on the chair and watched him move around the kitchen. He opened the fridge, took out a bottle of water, and handed it to me like we were still normal. Like we were still a couple that shared small routines and boring evenings and future plans. I took the bottle. Did you have lunch? He didn't even hesitate. Yeah. Grabbed something quick. Quick. That word again. I looked at him over the rim of the bottle. Where? At the office cafe. He said it so smoothly that for a second I almost doubted myself. Almost. But the receipt was still there. The charge was still real. And the cashier had no reason to invent 2 drinks and a table for 2. I nodded, and went upstairs before he could see too much on my face. In the bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out my phone. The bank app was still open. I checked the charge again, then looked at the timestamp, then searched the restaurant. Bella Napoli was only 20 minutes away from our house. Fancy, quiet, expensive enough that people could sit for a long time without being noticed. That was the worst part. He hadn't been careless. He had been comfortable. I opened my messages and scrolled through our recent texts. He had told me he was buried in meetings. He had told me not to wait up. He had told me not to worry. Every line suddenly looked different, like a page I had read too fast and needed to study again. Then I noticed something else. At 2:11 p.m., and he had sent a message saying he might be tied up late. At 2:24, another one saying the day was going to drag. At 2:58, a short note about traffic downtown. Traffic downtown. Bella Napoli was not downtown. I sat there longer than I meant to, staring at the screen until my chest felt tight. It wasn't just that he had lied. It was how easy it had been for him. How he had already built a story and dropped it in front of me like I wouldn't bother checking the edges. Downstairs, I heard him opening cabinets. Plates, a spoon. The sound of ordinary life continuing as if nothing had shifted. I opened my laptop and went into my account history through the bank website, this time on the desktop instead of my phone. I pulled up the last 3 weeks of spending. Most of it was normal. Groceries, gas, one subscription I didn't recognize, a few delivery charges. And then I saw it. Bella Napoli had appeared twice before. Not today. Not the most recent week. But 2 other times, both on nights he had told me he was working late. Both charges small enough to hide inside a larger month. One dinner for 2. Another dinner for 2. My mouth went dry again. 3 times. Maybe more. I went through the rest of the statement carefully, line by line, like I was reading a report. There were charges that didn't match his usual habits. A florist I had never heard of. A parking garage near the river. A late-night coffee place across town. Nothing huge. Nothing loud. Just enough pieces to suggest a second life built quietly beside mine. I heard his footsteps on the stairs and quickly closed the laptop. He walked into the bedroom with a towel over one shoulder, hair still damp from washing his hands in the downstairs sink. "You look stressed," he said. "I'm fine." He studied me for half a second too long. "You sure?" I looked at him and tried to keep my voice steady. "Where exactly did you say you had lunch today?" He paused. It was tiny. Barely there. but I caught it. "Why?" he asked. I gave him the softest smile I could manage. "No reason. I just forgot." He relaxed immediately, which told me more than any confession would have. "At the cafe near the office," he said. "Same as usual." Same as usual. That was his mistake. Not the lie itself. The confidence. He thought the ordinary details would protect him. I nodded and turned away before he could see my hands shaking. By midnight, he was asleep beside me, one arm stretched across his chest, breathing deep and calm. I lay there in the dark with my eyes open, listening to the sound of the house and the weight of the receipt folded inside my nightstand drawer. I didn't know who he had been with. I didn't know how long this had been going on, but I knew one thing for certain now. The cashier hadn't just recognized my card. She had handed me the first crack in a lie that was already starting to split. I spent the next morning pretending I was normal. That was harder than I expected. He left early, as he always did, with his coffee in one hand and his phone already buzzing in the other. He kissed my cheek at the door and told me he'd probably be late again. I nodded, smiled, and watched him walk to the car like I hadn't spent half the night staring at his face in the dark, trying to remember when I had stopped knowing him. The second the garage door closed, I moved. I started with the obvious things first: bank records, email receipts, delivery history, anything that could give me a clean line from one lie to the next. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, my phone beside me, and a legal pad I hadn't used in years. I wasn't angry yet, not in the loud, messy way people imagine. I was cold, focused, the kind of calm that shows up when a person realizes they've been made a fool of and decides not to be fooled again. The first thing I noticed was the restaurant pattern. Bella Napoli had charged my card on 3 separate dates over the last month. Always on weekdays. Always between 6:40 and 8:15. Always for 2 people. The amounts were close enough to look casual, but consistent enough to look planned. Expensive wine, a shared appetizer, a main course for each person, no dessert. That detail bothered me more than it should have, because it meant the evening wasn't spontaneous. It meant he had chosen a place where he knew the bill, the lighting, the staff, and probably the excuse if anyone asked why he was there. I opened the bank app again and checked the merchant descriptions. One charge had a tip added manually. Another had been split across 2 cards. That one made my stomach tighten. Not because of the money, because someone had been careful enough to pay in a way that wouldn't stand out. I leaned back in my chair and looked around the kitchen. The coffee mug still sat in the sink where he had left it. His jacket was draped over the chair. The house looked the same as it always had, but I couldn't stop seeing it differently now. Every object felt like it might be hiding something. I went to our shared email next. He was sloppy there. Not sloppy enough to leave a confession, but sloppy enough to leave edges. Reservation confirmations, calendar invites, a few forwarded messages with subjects so harmless they almost looked fake. Dinner with clients, late discussion, vendor meeting. One of them had a restaurant logo at the bottom of the page. Bella Napoli. I stared at it for a long time. So it wasn't some random lunch. It wasn't a one-time mistake. He had built this around a lie that repeated itself so smoothly, he probably stopped hearing it. My fingers hovered over the trackpad while I opened the next message. It was a confirmation for a table on Tuesday night. The reservation name wasn't his. It wasn't mine either. A woman's name. My pulse jumped, but I kept reading. The confirmation time matched one of the charges. The table was for 2. The note at the bottom mentioned a corner seat near the back window. I felt almost sick, not because I didn't know this was coming, but because now it had shape. Before, it was only suspicion, then a receipt, then a bank charge. Now it had a name attached to it, even if I didn't know who she was yet. I copied everything into a folder and named it something boring. Work. The kind of word no one would question. Then I backed it up to a private drive and sent a copy to an account I used only for things I never wanted to lose. A part of me wanted to confront him then. Just call him up, ask him where he'd really been, and watch the lie crawl out of his mouth. But I didn't, because I needed more than a denial. I needed a shape to the whole thing. a pattern. Something that couldn't be smoothed over with one sweet sentence and a fake apology. So I did what I always did when something didn't add up. I started counting. Dates, times, distances, receipts, routes. He had been telling me he was working late on the same nights Bella Napoli showed up on the statement. That part was too neat to be accidental. I pulled up his calendar and found gaps where there shouldn't have been gaps. One meeting ended at 6 Hwao, and the next item didn't begin until after 9 Hwao. 3 hours missing. Plenty of time for a dinner, a drive, and a second story. Then I checked location sharing. We had set it up years ago, mostly out of convenience. He kept insisting it was helpful when he was on site or in traffic. I had never cared enough to look at it closely. Now I looked, and there it was. On 2 of the dates, his phone had been in the same area as Bella Napoli for nearly 2 hours. Not downtown, not at the office. Right there, in the same neighborhood. Parked long enough to suggest a full evening. I sat back and let that sink in. He hadn't just been lying. He had been organized. The kind of organized that comes from habit. That was what made my chest feel tight. Not the possibility of a single bad night, but the realization that this could go back far enough to be a routine. A side life. A place he visited when he felt entitled to do so. I heard the front door open downstairs and quickly shut my laptop. He was home early. I took a slow breath and forced my shoulders down. When he came into the kitchen, I was standing by the sink with a dish towel in my hand, pretending to wipe a counter that was already clean. "Wow," he said, loosening his tie. "You're being productive." I looked at him and gave him a small, tired smile. "Just trying to keep busy." He stepped closer and kissed the top of my head. "You look better today." "Better." I almost laughed. He went to the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and leaned against the counter like he belonged there in every version of the day. "I might have another late one tomorrow," he said casually. "Don't wait up." I didn't answer right away. I was watching his face now in a way I never had before. Not as a wife. Not as a partner. As someone reading a stranger foretells. He looked calm. Too calm. I asked, "Another dinner?" He froze so quickly most people wouldn't have noticed. Just a flicker. Then he smiled. "What do you mean?" I met his eyes and kept my voice light. "Nothing. Just sounds like you've been busy." He let out a soft laugh and took a sip of water. "That's work. You know how it is." "Sure," I thought. Work. That word was starting to sound like a costume. I turned away before he could see anything on my face, but inside, the pieces were settling into place. There was someone else, and he had already gotten used to lying about her. I started following him on a Thursday. Not in the dramatic way people imagine, with headlights cutting through rain and a heart pounding in the chest. It was quieter than that. Cleaner. I left the house 10 minutes after he did, stayed far enough behind not to be noticed, and told myself I was just confirming what I already knew. His car didn't go toward the office. That was the first clear proof. Instead, he took the river road, crossed 2 exits sooner than usual, and parked in front of a small building I had never bothered to notice before. It was one of those places that looked expensive only to the people who knew how to look at it. Dark windows. Polished stone. A valet stand near the curb. No sign out front that meant anything to me. I parked 2 blocks away and watched from across the street. He got out of the car, straightened his jacket, and checked his phone. A woman appeared a minute later from the side entrance. Tall, dark hair, sharp clothes. She moved like someone who knew exactly where she was going. He smiled when he saw her, and not the polite smile he used with clients or neighbors. This one was softer, easier, familiar. My chest tightened. They didn't hug. They didn't rush. They just walked inside together like they had done it before. I sat there gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands hurt. For a few seconds I couldn't think clearly. I just kept staring at the door, waiting for it to open again, waiting for some explanation that could somehow make what I had seen less ugly. But the door stayed shut. The building stayed still. And I stayed in my car like an idiot, watching the life I had trusted move behind a wall I had never thought to check. I left before they came out. Not because I was done. Because I needed air. Driving back, I kept replaying the image in my mind. His face when he saw her. The ease of the way they went inside. The building itself. It wasn't a restaurant. It wasn't the office. It looked private. Too private. The kind of place people used when they wanted no one asking questions. By the time I reached home, my anger had shifted into something sharper. I wasn't hurt in the messy way anymore. I was alert. Every detail mattered. Every move mattered. I went straight to the desk in the study and opened the folder I had been building all week. Receipts, statements, calendar gaps, location stamps. Now I added a new line in the notes column. Unseen woman, dark hair, building on River Road, arrived after him. I kept staring at the page until I realized my hand was shaking. The name column was still blank. That bothered me more than I expected. If I had her name, the whole thing would become real in a different way. It would stop being a shape in the dark and become a person, a face, someone I could point to. Right now, I only had a shadow. I went back through his recent spending again, more carefully this time. There were charges I hadn't noticed before because they were small. Coffee shops near the river, a florist on the east side. One charge from a women's boutique that made no sense at all until I looked at the date and remembered he had claimed to be at a client dinner that night. The same pattern kept appearing. He would disappear for 2 or 3 hours, and then there would be a tiny payment somewhere else. Not enough to raise suspicion if you weren't looking. Just enough to fill in the gaps if you were. By evening, I had enough to know that whatever this was, it wasn't new. That was the part that made me sit down hard on the couch. New hurts in one way. Old hurts in another. Old means planned. Old means practiced. Old means he had gotten comfortable living 2 lives and expected me to stay too distracted to notice. He came home around 7:40, tie loosened, jacket over one shoulder, looking as tired and ordinary as always. I was in the kitchen when he walked in, and I lifted my head at just the right moment, like a wife waiting at the end of a workday. "Long meeting?" I asked. He dropped his keys in the bowl by the door. "You know it." I turned back to the stove so he wouldn't see my face. "Must be exhausting." "It is." He loosened his collar and came up behind me, resting a hand lightly at my waist. "You should come with me one of these days. Then you'd see what I deal with." I nearly stiffened. Instead, I let out a small laugh. "I'm sure I'd be bored in 10 minutes. He kissed the side of my neck. "Probably." The touch made my skin crawl. Not because it was aggressive, because it was automatic. He did it like a habit, the same way people tap their pockets for keys. Casual, natural, unthinking. I served dinner and watched him eat while he talked about traffic, an annoying email, a useless meeting, a project deadline. He was good at it. Too good. Every sentence had just enough detail to sound real. That was what scared me most now. He didn't sound like a liar trying to survive. He sounded like a man who had rehearsed this role so many times it had become second nature. I studied his hands, his watch, the calm way he poured water into his glass. Somewhere in the middle of the meal, he looked up and asked, "Why are you so quiet tonight?" I shrugged and kept my voice gentle. "Just thinking." "About what?" I smiled without showing my teeth. "Work." That made him relax. Of course it did. The rest of the night passed like a scene being acted out for an audience of one. He watched TV. I folded laundry. He went to bed early. I stayed up for another hour in the kitchen, staring at the folder on my laptop and the list of questions growing inside my head. Who was she? How long had this been going on? And why did he think I would never find out? I didn't have the answers yet, but now I had his trail. And the trail led somewhere he had clearly wanted to keep hidden. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on my side staring at the dark ceiling while he breathed beside me like nothing in the world had changed. Every now and then, he shifted an arm or muttered something in his sleep, and each little sound made my stomach tighten. Not because I was scared of him, because I was finally scared of what I might find if I kept digging. By morning, the anger had settled into something heavier. Not louder, heavier. He left early again, talking about a meeting near the harbor. I watched him from the window until his car disappeared around the corner. Then I went straight to the desk in the study and pulled out the folder I had been building. Receipts, bank statements, calendar gaps, location history. The picture was still incomplete, but it was becoming clear enough to hurt. I started with the restaurant charges again. 3 dinners at Bella Napoli, 3 different dates. 3 nights he had told me he was tied up at work. I checked the times one by one and compared them with his calendar. Every gap matched. Every excuse lined up too neatly. It was almost insulting how carefully he had organized it. Then I looked at the florist's. That one made my chest go tight. There were 2 small charges from a flower shop across town. One bouquet had been delivered on a Tuesday evening, another on a Friday morning. The receipts didn't say who sent them, but they did show the billing card. My card. Not his. Mine. I sat back slowly. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, trying to understand how he had been using my money without me noticing. The answer came a second later, and it made me feel cold all over. The account had been set up years ago as a shared backup for household spending. He had access. I had trusted that access because trusting him had always seemed easier than checking every small thing. Not anymore. I opened the transaction details and found a pattern I had missed before. Small charges spread out over weeks. Parking, wine, a jewelry repair shop, a boutique hotel near the river. Nothing flashy enough to trigger concern, just quiet enough to slip past if no one was paying attention. He had used my card at least 6 times that I could see, maybe more. I pressed my hand against my mouth and sat there for a long minute, letting the truth settle in. It wasn't just another woman anymore. It was deception with a budget. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the laptop open, a notebook beside me, and started writing everything down. Date, time, amount, merchant, notes. I wanted a clean timeline, something my brain could understand without the noise of emotion getting in the way. I had spent years helping other people keep their records straight. Now I was turning that habit on my own life. As I wrote, I noticed one of the charges was from a boutique hotel. That was new. I clicked into the reservation confirmation saved in the email archive. It had been booked under a business name I didn't recognize, but the guest line showed a first name only. Claire. I said it out loud once, softly. Claire. So now the shadow had a name. I wasn't sure whether that made it better or worse. I searched again, slower this time, and found more traces. A dinner reservation under the same name. A spa charge. A parking receipt. All of them within the same few weeks. All of them linked to the same card pattern. The same lie, repeated in different forms. My phone buzzed beside me. A message from him. Running late. Don't wait for me. I stared at it for a while, then looked back at the notebook. Don't wait for me. He probably thought that sounded normal. Maybe even considerate. But now it felt like a line he had learned to use when he wanted freedom without questions. I wrote it down too. Then I did something I hadn't planned to do yet. I opened our shared photo album. The one full of family dinners, trips, holidays, birthdays, little moments that had once felt real. I started scrolling through the last few months, looking for anything out of place. I didn't know exactly what I expected. A reflection in a window, a name in the background, a comment deleted too fast. I found nothing obvious. That almost made me laugh. He had been careful with the public part of our life too. But care leaves a shape, and I was finally learning how to see it. Around noon, I drove to a bank branch on the other side of town and asked for printed copies of the account activity. The clerk didn't seem to notice anything strange about me. Maybe that was the benefit of looking ordinary when your life is falling apart. People assume you're fine. Back home, I spread the pages across the dining table and checked them against the digital records. The evidence matched. There was no mistake, no accidental swipe, no confusion, no harmless lunch gone wrong. He had taken my card and used it to build a second life in small, quiet pieces. I stood there over the table for a long time, looking at the papers until the words stopped blurring. What hurt most wasn't even the spending. It was the confidence behind it, the ease, the certainty that I wouldn't notice because I was too busy being the wife who kept the house together, paid attention to the routines, and trusted the man who slept beside me every night. He had mistaken patience for blindness. That was his real error. At 6:12, he texted again. At the office. Don't cook for me. I almost answered. Almost told him I knew about the charges, about Bella Napoli, about Claire. About the hotel. But I stopped myself before my fingers could move. Not yet. I needed one thing more before I let him see the fire. I needed him to keep lying just a little longer. So I set the phone down, folded the bank statements into a neat stack, and looked at the clock on the wall. By then, I wasn't asking whether he was cheating. I was asking how far he had gone. I decided not to confront him. Not yet. If I wanted the truth to stick, I needed more than anger and a stack of printed charges. I needed a version of events he couldn't smooth over with a tired face and a half apology. So that morning, after he left for work, I sat at the dining table with my notebook open and started building a plan. Not a dramatic one. A quiet one. The kind that grows while the other person keeps thinking everything is normal. I made a list of what I already had. Restaurant charges, hotel receipts, his calendar gaps, the River Road building, Claire's name, my card being used more than once. It still wasn't enough to walk into a room and blow everything apart. He would deny the worst of it. He would say the card had been borrowed or the charges were mixed up, or Claire was some business contact I had misunderstood. Men like him always found a way to make the truth sound inconvenient. So I stopped thinking like a wife and started thinking like someone who audits damage. The first thing I needed was access. Not to his heart, to his habits. I spent most of the morning checking our home network, the shared cloud folders, the calendar apps, the old email backups he forgot I could still see. He had always been comfortable using the same devices, the same passwords, the same spaces. That was the problem with people who believe loyalty means not checking behind them. They leave a trail without realizing it. By noon, I had enough to know he was still meeting her. One lunch reservation. One parking charge near the river. One message in the calendar that only said, site visit. Site visit. I almost rolled my eyes. I copied the details into my notebook and then did something I had been avoiding. I searched the building on the River Road more carefully. It was a private office and lounge space rented by the hour, the kind of place rich people use when they want discretion without having to call it that. One of the suites had been booked under an account tied to his company. Of course it had. My stomach turned, but I kept going. If he was using company resources for this, then the lie wasn't just personal anymore. It was bigger. Messier. That meant more leverage for me. I spent the afternoon making the house look normal. I put the kitchen back in order, answered a few emails, even folded laundry while the TV played in the background. From the outside, it would have looked like a calm day in a marriage. Inside, I was counting every detail like a person preparing for a storm. At 3:40, I made a decision. I would act like nothing was happening. I would let him think I was distracted, tired, maybe a little sensitive. I would give him room to keep lying. And while he relaxed, I would keep collecting every detail he handed me. So when he texted me around 5 saying he might be late, I answered with a simple, "Okay, I'll eat without you." That was all it took. He replied almost instantly with a heart emoji. A heart emoji. I stared at it for a second and felt something hard and cold settle in my chest. He was still playing the role of a good husband, right down to the tiny signals. It was almost impressive. Almost. That evening, I did something I had never done before. I checked the shared credit card statements from the other direction, searching not for what he spent, but for where he spent it. The merchant names formed a rough map. Bella Napoli, a florist, parking near the river, a wine bar, a boutique hotel, a jewelry repair shop. Jewelry. That one caught my attention. I clicked into the charge and saw it had happened 2 weeks ago. He had spent nearly an hour there. Not enough to be suspicious by itself, unless you already had a reason to look. I wrote it down anyway. The next thing I found made my breathing go shallow. A transfer from one of our joint accounts to a personal account I hadn't used in years. Not a large amount, just enough to look harmless. He had moved the money in stages, over several days, likely trying to make it blend into regular spending. That was when the anger came back, cleaner this time. Not because he had taken the money, because he had decided I would never notice. I closed my laptop and walked to the window. The street outside was quiet. A neighbor's dog barked once. Somewhere farther down the block, a motorcycle passed and faded into the distance. The world kept moving like always. Nothing looked broken from here, but I knew better now. I heard his car pull into the driveway at 7:18. My pulse stayed steady. I had expected nerves, but what I felt instead was a strange stillness, like my body had already stepped out of the scene and was waiting for the next line. He came inside carrying takeout bags. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, sounding almost sweet. I took the bag from him and looked at the logo. A place across town. Not Bella Napoli. Not the office. Not anywhere near where he had claimed to be. "Thanks," I said. He kissed my cheek. "Rough day. You could say that." He smiled, not catching the edge in my voice, and went to wash his hands. I watched him move around the kitchen and thought about how easy he made everything look, how ordinary he could be while lying through every part of his life. We ate in silence for a while. Then he said, "I might have to head out early tomorrow, too." I set my fork down, not because I was shocked, because he said it so casually, like he was asking for a napkin. "Another site visit?" I asked. He didn't even pause. "Yeah, long one." I nodded and picked up my glass. "Must be important." "It is." I smiled at him and let the silence stretch. He had no idea that every lie was helping me. Every fake meeting, every late dinner, every harmless text. He was building my case one sentence at a time. By the time he went upstairs to shower, I was already back at the table with my notebook open. The plan was working, and he still believed he was the one in control. That was the week I found out who Claire really was. I had already seen her name enough times to know it wasn't a mistake. But names on a screen are one thing. A person is another. So I waited, watched, and let his routine keep playing out while I followed the trail he thought was invisible. It started with a message on his laptop. He had left it open on the desk in the study, charging beside a stack of papers he never actually read at home. I was only going in to get the printer paper, but the screen lit up with a notification, and there it was. Claire. Just one line. "Same time tomorrow?" I stood still for a second, not breathing. No dramatic music, no sudden movement. Just the strange quiet of a house that keeps pretending it's normal while the truth starts showing its teeth. I didn't open the message. I didn't need to. The preview was enough. Same time tomorrow meant routine. It meant this had happened before. It meant they already knew the schedule, which made everything worse than a one-time mistake. I took a picture of the screen with my phone and left the study exactly as I found it. That evening, when he came home, I watched him more closely than ever. He looked tired, but not the kind of tired that comes from real work. More like a man carrying two lives and trying not to let either one slip. He kissed me on the forehead, asked what I wanted for dinner, and sat at the table like he had spent the day being responsible. I almost admired the performance. Almost. Halfway through the meal, I decided to test him. "Did you see Claire today?" I asked, keeping my tone light. He didn't choke. He didn't freeze dramatically, but the fork in his hand stopped moving for half a second. That tiny pause was enough. "Claire?" he repeated. "Yeah," I said, watching him carefully. "You mentioned her once when you were talking about that project on the river road." He gave a short laugh, the kind people use when they're trying to dismiss a question without answering it. "You remember every little thing I say?" "I remember a lot." He took a sip of water and leaned back in his chair. "She's just someone from work. Just someone." That phrase did more damage than a confession would have. Because it wasn't denial. It was minimization. He was trying to make her sound unimportant, replaceable, harmless. Men only do that when they know the truth is dangerous. I nodded and let him think I believed him. After dinner, I went upstairs and checked the photo again. Then I compared it with the charges, the locations, the reservations, the way every clue had circled around the same weeks. The picture was getting clearer. Claire wasn't random. She was part of a rhythm. And if she was part of the rhythm, then I needed to know where it led. The next day, I drove past the River Road building in the afternoon and parked far enough away that no one would notice me sitting there. I told myself I was only checking the place, but I already knew why I was there. I wanted to see if he would show up. I wanted proof I could trust with my own eyes. At 3:12, his car pulled into the lot. My chest tightened, but I stayed still. He got out and looked around before heading inside. A few minutes later, Claire arrived. Same hair, same sharp clothes, same easy confidence. She wasn't trying to hide. That, more than anything, made my stomach turn. She moved like someone who believed she had a right to be there. I watched them go in together. No hesitation, no distance, no awkwardness. By then, I no longer had to ask if they were involved. The question was how long it had been going on, and what else they had managed to keep from me. I sat there in my car for almost 20 minutes, trying to keep my breathing steady. Then I noticed something I hadn't before. A third person arriving. A man in a dark jacket, carrying a briefcase. He didn't look like a friend. He looked like business. He went in the same entrance. And all of a sudden, the whole thing felt larger than a secret affair. That mattered, because affairs are one thing. Affairs tied to money are another. I started thinking back over the earlier charges, the transfers, the strange gaps in his calendar. The longer I looked at it, the more it seemed like Claire wasn't just a woman he was seeing. She was part of the machinery he had been hiding from me. A piece of the second life, yes, but maybe also a piece of something more calculated. I drove home with my jaw tight, and my hands still cold on the steering wheel. Inside the house, everything looked untouched. The couch cushions were neat. The lamps were on. The air smelled faintly like the cleaner I had used that morning. It was all so normal it felt offensive. I opened my notebook and wrote, Claire, same time tomorrow. River Road Building, not alone. Then I underlined the last part twice. He came home later than usual. I was in the living room with a book open in my lap, pretending I had spent the afternoon doing nothing important. He smiled when he saw me and asked if I had a good day. Quiet, I said. Good, he answered. I looked up at him and realized something I hadn't wanted to admit yet. He wasn't just lying. He was comfortable lying. And Claire was not a side note anymore. She was part of the life he thought I would never see. I found the proof on a Tuesday morning, and it was uglier than I expected. He had left for work early, as usual, and the house was quiet enough that I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. I sat at the dining table with my notebook, the laptop open beside me, and went back through the charges one more time. I was no longer hoping to be wrong. I just wanted the shape of the thing to finally make sense. That was when I found the new charge. A boutique jewelry store. High-end. Not a place you stop by for a casual gift unless you want to spend real money. The amount was large enough to matter and small enough to hide. I stared at the line on the statement for a long time, then checked the date twice. The same night he had claimed to be stuck at the office. I clicked into the merchant details and saw the time. 8:41 p.m. Not dinner, not a quick coffee. Something happened after dinner. I opened the shared calendar and looked for anything around that evening. There was a blank gap where his schedule should have been packed. The kind of gap that used to pass unnoticed, because I trusted him. Now it looked like a missing tooth in the middle of a smile. My hands were cold by the time I printed the statement. Then I checked the other charges again, this time with the jewelry one in mind. Bella Napoli, the River Road Building, the hotel, the florist, the boutique. It all lined up too neatly to be random. It looked like a life someone had built carefully, one receipt at a time. I kept digging. In the shared cloud folder, I found a scanned copy of a small purchase receipt from the jewelry store. Not a ring, not a necklace. Something else. A watch band. Men's. Expensive. A gift receipt had been attached to it, but the name on the note was handwritten and partially cut off. Claire. I said her name out loud, then sat back hard in the chair. The word on the page was small, but it hit me like a slap. Now I knew she wasn't just a woman he met for dinner. She was being given things. My card was being used, my money was being moved, and somewhere in the middle of all that, he was buying gifts for another woman and pretending I was too distracted to notice. That part hurt more than I wanted to admit. It would have been easier if this had been about lust alone. Easier to blame stupidity, weakness, bad judgment. But gifts meant thought, effort, planning. It meant he had gone out into the world and chosen something for her with me sitting at home like a fool. I took photos of every page, Every receipt, every confirmation. I backed everything up twice. Then I made a new document and titled it cleanly, just as I had been taught to do when numbers started telling a story someone didn't want told. By noon, I had a full timeline. The first dinner at Bella Napoli, the florist charge, the River Road booking, the hotel stay, the jewelry store, the transfer from our joint account to his personal one, and now Claire's name attached to a gift receipt. I read it all again and felt something inside me shift. This was no longer about betrayal in the abstract. It was money, access, deception, repetition. That made it bigger, and in a strange way, that made me steadier. A small part of me still wanted to cry. Another part wanted to scream, but the stronger part, the part I had relied on all my life, was already moving into place. I wasn't going to collapse over this. I was going to document it. That afternoon, I changed my routine on purpose. I went to the store, came back with groceries, answered emails, and made the house look lived in. Then I acted like I had forgotten something and used his laptop while he was out. That was where I found the next piece, a message thread between him and Claire. Not the whole thing, just enough to see the tone. Can't wait to see you. Same place tomorrow? She hasn't noticed anything. I stared at that last line until the letters blurred. She hasn't noticed anything. He sent it 2 days earlier. My throat tightened, but I kept reading the thread carefully. Their messages were short and controlled. No drama. No excessive sweetness. Just a steady, familiar rhythm. The kind of talk that comes after people stop worrying about getting caught. Claire wasn't a secret anymore. She was part of the arrangement. I copied the messages into my folder, then sat very still, listening to the sound of the air conditioner hum through the vents. A strange calm came over me then. Not peace, not forgiveness, just clarity. I finally understood what he had been doing. He wasn't slipping. He wasn't confused. He had been building 2 lives side by side, trusting me to stay in the version he approved of while he enjoyed the one he kept hidden. The worst part was that I had been helping by being quiet. Not anymore. I made one last printout, folded it, and slipped it into the growing stack inside the drawer of my desk. The stack was becoming thick enough to feel real in my hands. Real enough to matter. Real enough to end something. When he came home that night, he looked normal. That was the hardest thing to accept. He smiled. He asked about dinner. He kissed my cheek. He even laughed at something I said, like there wasn't a hidden life wrapped around every casual gesture. I watched him from across the room and understood something simple. He thought I was still standing outside the truth. He was wrong. Now I had Claire's name, the gift, the messages, and the proof that this had been going on long enough for him to brag about it. And once a liar starts bragging, he's already halfway to falling. I set the trap the next morning. Not in a dramatic way. No phone call, no shouting, no sudden confrontation in the driveway. I wanted something quieter, cleaner, and much harder for him to twist later. If I was going to corner him, I needed him comfortable first. So I did the opposite of what my instincts wanted. I acted warm. I made breakfast. I asked about his day. I touched his arm when he walked past me in the kitchen and smiled like I still believed in the version of our life he had been feeding me. He relaxed almost immediately. That part made me sick. But I kept going. He had to believe I was softening. He had to believe I was ready to move on, or at least too tired to keep asking questions. By noon, I had sent him a message that looked harmless. "Can we do dinner tonight? Just the 2 of us." He replied in less than a minute. Of course. That single word was enough to tell me he had no idea what was waiting for him. I chose Bella Napoli. Not because it was romantic, because it was the place where the first lie had started to crack. If he wanted to keep pretending this was all some harmless work stress, then I wanted the evidence sitting right across from him in the same room where the whole thing had begun. I asked for a corner table, the one tucked far enough back to keep the room quiet but close enough to see the entrance. I arrived early. I wore the gray dress he liked, the one that made me look calm and put together. My hair was smooth. My makeup was light. If anyone saw me walking in, they would have thought I was showing up for a normal date with a husband who still mattered to me. That was the point. I wasn't there as a woman begging for answers. I was there as the person who had already found them. I ordered water, no wine, and sat with my phone face down beside the plate. On the screen were the photos I had taken of the receipts, the messages, the gift charge, and the timeline. Every piece waited there like a loaded weapon. He arrived 10 minutes late. When he walked in, I watched him scan the room the way people do when they are checking for familiar faces. He spotted me and smiled, easy and casual, as if this were just another ordinary evening between two people who trusted each other. He kissed my cheek when he reached the table. "You look beautiful." I smiled back. "Sit down." He didn't notice my tone. Or if he did, he ignored it. We ordered. And for a few minutes I let the conversation drift in circles. I asked about the office. He gave me vague answers. I asked about the River Road site visit. He said it was dull. I asked whether Claire was part of that project. That got his attention. He looked up from the menu. "Claire." I kept my face calm. "Yes, Claire." There it was again. That tiny pause, the smallest delay. But by then, I could hear it clearly, like a note that was slightly off pitch. "What about her?" he asked. I leaned back in my chair and placed my phone on the table. "I think you know exactly what I'm asking." He gave a short laugh. "Not really." I turned the screen around and slid it toward him. He looked down at the first photo. The Bella Napoli charge, then the second, then the reservation confirmation with Claire's name, then the jewelry store receipt, then the message thread. His face didn't change all at once. It happened in layers. First confusion, then irritation, then that faint, dangerous stillness of a man realizing the room has shifted under his feet. He looked back up at me. "Where did you get this?" I folded my hands together. "Does it matter?" "Yes, it matters. Not as much as the truth does." He lowered his voice. "You went through my things?" I almost laughed. That was where he wanted to go first. Not to the lies, not to Claire, not to the money. Straight to my supposed invasion of privacy. It was such a familiar move it nearly exhausted me. "You used my card," I said. "You booked dinners, hotel rooms, flowers, and gifts. You moved money from our account. And you told me you were at work." His jaw tightened. I could see him calculating now. Not panic. Calculation. He was deciding what kind of story could still survive. "She's just someone I've been helping with a project," he said. That's it. I stared at him. Even now, with all of it in front of him, he was still trying to shrink the truth into something clean enough to swallow. "A project," I repeated. "Yes. Then why the dinners?" He said nothing. "Why the hotel?" Still nothing. "Why use my card?" That finally made him shift in his seat. I knew that look. Not guilt, exposure. He wasn't sorry he had done it. He was sorry I had found out before he had a chance to control the version of events. The waiter came by then, and for 1 second the whole table froze. He asked if we were ready to order. I told him yes, and my husband said, "I'll have the steak." His voice had gone too smooth now, too polished. He was trying to reset the room, trying to pull us back into ordinary life, as if the evidence wasn't sitting between the bread plate and the wine glass. Once the waiter left, he leaned toward me. "Can we talk about this at home?" "No. People are watching." I glanced around the restaurant. "Good." That was when the mask started slipping. He spoke lower. "You don't understand what's going on." "I understand enough." He shook his head once, slow and controlled. "Claire is helping me with business. That's all." Then explain the messages. He didn't answer. "Explain the flowers." Nothing. "The jewelry?" Still nothing. I watched his mouth tighten. He was running out of room and he knew it. I slid the final page across the table. The transfer from our joint account. His eyes dropped to it, and for the first time that night he looked genuinely cornered. "This is not what you think," he said. I held his gaze. It was almost funny. People always say that line when they know the truth is standing right in front of them. I leaned forward and kept my voice calm. "Then tell me what it is." He opened his mouth, closed it, and for a second I thought he might finally tell me something real. Instead, he looked away, and that was the moment I understood the truth more clearly than ever. He had no defense. Only delay. The trap was set, and he was already caught inside it. I waited until the waiter brought the plates before I said another word. Not because I needed more time, because I wanted the room to stay quiet enough for him to feel it. He sat there staring at the papers I had spread across the table, his face tight now. The kind of tight that comes from realizing every exit has narrowed. I didn't rush him. I let him sit in it. Let the sound of silverware and low conversations around us keep moving while our table felt like a sealed box. When the waiter left, I pushed my chair back just enough to lean in and speak clearly. "Tell me one thing," I said. "Did you ever plan to stop lying on your own? Or were you going to keep going until I found out everything?" His eyes flicked up to mine, then down again. That was answer enough. He exhaled through his nose and tried for a smile. It didn't work. "You're making this bigger than it is." I laughed once, quietly. Not because it was funny, because it was almost unbelievable. "Bigger?" I repeated. "You used my money to buy gifts for another woman. You booked hotel rooms. You met her while telling me you were at work. You moved money out of our account. You think that's small?" He looked around the room, probably hoping no one at the neighboring tables was paying attention. That was the thing about men like him. Even when they get caught, they still care more about appearance than truth. I said I could explain. He muttered, "Then explain." He rubbed a hand over his mouth and stared at the table for a long second. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, rougher than before. "Claire works with me on the Marina project." I didn't react. He went on, as if saying it slower might make it hold together. "There were problems with funding, investors, timing. She has contacts. That's why I've been meeting her." I tilted my head. "And the dinners?" His jaw tightened. "Those were work dinners. 3 dinners at the same restaurant?" He didn't answer. "The flowers?" No answer. "The hotel?" Still nothing. I watched him struggle, and something in me went very still. He wasn't going to tell the truth because the truth wasn't one thing. It was layers. It was meetings he had hidden, money he had moved, time he had stolen, and a woman he had chosen to put between us. He was hoping I would get tired before he did. He didn't know me very well anymore. I reached into my bag and took out the printed bank pages. I set them beside the plates like evidence in a case file. The charges sat there in a neat stack, impossible to ignore. His eyes moved across them, and I saw the moment he understood that I had already done the work. I had already connected the pattern. I hadn't walked into the restaurant with questions. I had walked in with a verdict waiting to be read. "Claire's name is on the gift receipt," I said. "Your messages mention her. Your calendar has gaps that match the charges. You booked the hotel under a company account. You transferred money. You think I'm supposed to believe this is all business?" He stared at me without speaking. Then his voice changed. Not softer, more controlled. "You went through all of that without asking me once," he said. There it was. The move he had been waiting for. He wanted the conversation to shift from what he had done to what I had done to uncover it. It was such a small manipulation, but people like him count on small things. They work because they are easy to miss when you're tired or hurt. "I asked you," I said. "You lied." He pressed his lips together. The silence between us stretched until the room seemed to lean closer. I could hear a glass clink at the bar. A chair scraping somewhere behind me. Everything normal, everything moving, except this table. He looked down at the evidence again and then back at me. "I was going to tell you," he said. I stared at him. That was almost the worst line of the night. Not because I believed it, but because it was so lazy, so familiar, so empty. "When?" I asked. He didn't answer. "When?" I repeated. His shoulders tightened. I was trying to figure things out first. With her? With business. I nodded slowly. "And the jewelry?" He closed his eyes for half a second. That tiny gesture gave him away more than any confession would have. I leaned back and let him sit with that. Let him hear how ridiculous he sounded. Let him realize that every excuse he had saved was already too late. The waiter came again and asked if everything was okay. I smiled at him and said yes. My husband said nothing. The waiter left. I turned back to him. "You know the part that hurts most?" He kept still. "You didn't even think I'd notice the card," I said. "You were using my money and counting on me not looking closely enough. That's how little you thought of me." He finally looked up, and for the first time there was something like anger in his face. Not shame, not regret, anger that I had said it out loud. "That's not fair," he said. I almost smiled. "Fair?" I repeated. "You really want to talk about fair?" He pushed his chair back a few inches and lowered his voice. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under." There it was again. The excuse that always arrives dressed like a wound. I looked him straight in the eye. "No. I understand exactly what kind of pressure makes a man lie to his wife, sneak around with another woman, and spend shared money on gifts and hotel rooms. I understand that pretty well now." His face changed again. Not much. Just enough. The waiters, the music, the people around us all seemed suddenly very far away. I could feel the shape of the room closing in, like the air itself had decided to take sides. He opened his mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to apologize, but I wasn't interested anymore. I took out my phone, placed it on the table, and tapped the screen once. His eyes dropped to it. The folder was open. Messages, receipts, calendar screenshots, transfers. His face lost what little color it had left. I hadn't come to ask him whether he was lying. I had come to show him I already knew, and as he stared at the screen in silence, the last fragile part of his cover finally came apart. By the time we left the restaurant, the air outside felt colder than it should have. He didn't say much on the walk to the car. Neither did I. The truth had already been said at the table, and everything after that felt smaller. Streetlights spilled across the sidewalk in long, pale lines, and for a second I noticed how ordinary the world looked, while mine had cracked open completely. He held the car door for me out of habit, not kindness. I got in without looking at him. The drive home was quiet. No music, no fake conversation, just the sound of tires on the road and his hands tightening and loosening on the wheel. I kept my eyes on the window and watched the city move past us like nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something permanent. When we pulled into the driveway, he killed the engine and sat there for a second before speaking. "We need to talk," he said. I let out a small breath and turned to him. We already did. He looked tired now. Not dramatic, not broken. Just stripped down to the version of himself he had been hiding under all week. "Listen," he said. "I never meant for it to get this far. That sentence should have made me angry. Maybe earlier in the year it would have. But after receipts, messages, hotel charges, gifts, and lies repeated too many times, it mostly made me feel done." "You don't get to say that now," I told him. He rubbed a hand over his face. I was under pressure. There it is again. "It's not that simple." "Then make it simple," I said. "Tell me the truth without hiding behind work, pressure, or some project you don't even respect enough to explain." He didn't answer. Of course he didn't. I got out of the car and walked into the house without waiting for him. The living room looked exactly the same as it had that morning, which annoyed me more than it should have. The couch, the lamps, the framed photo from last year's vacation. All of it still sitting there like a lie can't live in a nice room. He came in behind me and stopped near the door. "What happens now?" he asked. I turned and looked at him for a long moment. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I was strangely calm, and that calm felt stronger than any scene would have been. "Now," I said, "you stop pretending I'm the problem." He looked like he wanted to argue, but I didn't give him room. "Now you tell me how long it's been going on." He swallowed. I waited. "Months," he said finally. "Not years. Not one mistake. Months." I nodded once, as if I had expected that answer all along, though the truth was worse than I wanted to admit. Months meant routines. Months meant planning. Months meant he had watched me every day and still chosen to keep going. "Was Claire the only one?" I asked. His face changed. That was enough. "Answer me." "No," he said quietly. My stomach tightened, but I stayed still. He looked away. "There were complications. Claire was part of it, but not all of it." I laughed, bitter and short. "Of course there were complications." He tried again. "The marina project needed support, funding, contacts. I was trying to keep things moving." "And the other woman?" He didn't answer. I stared at him and finally understood that I wasn't getting one clean confession because there wasn't one clean betrayal. It had all tangled together. Business, money, Claire, secret meetings, side arrangements. He had been building something behind my back, and then expecting me to keep standing inside the shell of our marriage like nothing was wrong. I walked past him toward the stairs. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Not to sleep in the same room as you." He followed me halfway up. "We can work this out." I stopped on the landing and turned around slowly. "No," I said. "You can work out whatever mess you made. I'm done carrying it." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I went into the bedroom, pulled out a suitcase, and started packing. Not everything. Just enough. Clothes, documents, my laptop, the folder with the receipts, the printed statements, the screenshots. Every piece of proof I had gathered over the past days went into a separate bag like it belonged to a different life now. He stood in the doorway and watched me. "You're really doing this?" he asked. I didn't look at him while folding the last shirt. "Yes." "Over this?" I finally turned. "Over this. After all the money, the gifts, the dinners, the hotel, the lies, the years I had trusted him. He still had the nerve to call it this, like it was an inconvenience instead of a collapse. "It's not over this," I said. "It's because of this." He said my name, but I didn't answer. When I was done, I closed the suitcase and picked up the folder. He stepped aside as I moved past him, and I could feel him trying to figure out whether to stop me or let me go. He did neither. I took the guest room that night. The bed was smaller, the room colder, but I slept better there than I had in weeks. In the morning, I woke up early, made coffee, and sat by the window while the sun came up over the neighborhood. The house was quiet. No footsteps upstairs, no fake phone calls, no excuses. Just silence. That silence felt different now. Not empty. Clean. He came downstairs around 8, looked at the suitcase by the door, and understood without asking. "I don't want to fight," he said. I wrapped both hands around my mug and looked out the window before answering. "Good," I said. "Then don't." He stood there for a second, like he wanted one final chance to pull the whole thing back into shape. But there wasn't anything left to fix. The version of us he had been talking to was already gone. I left before noon. No scene, no tears, no begging. Just the door closing behind me and the sound of my own shoes on the driveway. As I got into the car, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness, not relief exactly. Just a little more of myself returning, and that was enough.